أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله صلاة والسلام على رسول الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So we are going to continue inshallah chapter 15. We started last week and this is our last chapter, and inshallah we'll finish chapter 15 today, and then I will tell you inshallah at the end of the lecture what we plan for the next 2 or 3 classes that we have left inshallah. So let's continue our discussion in chapter 15. The next topic that we have in the human resources and payroll cycle is the outsourcing of the payroll services. Big companies, for example, like Qatar University has its own payroll department, which has many employees, and they take care of the human resources and payroll needs of the company because there are hundreds of employees and there are a lot of activities that are performed in the department. But if it's a small company, for example, let's say a small restaurant that has 10 or 15 employees, it is not financially feasible for them to hire an accountant and pay them 10,000 riyals per month, and they work on the payroll for only, let's say, a week during the month, and the rest of the month they don't have anything to do. So these smaller companies, they outsource the payroll to payroll service providers, for example, accounting firms. And when I used to work for the accounting firm in the US that I worked for, we had hundreds of uh, companies that we prepared the payroll for. So what the companies do is they send the vendor, the payroll preparer, the information on personnel changes. So if there is somebody new hired or someone fired or someone promoted, somebody's salary increased, this information is sent to the payroll service provider, and also the employee time and attendance data. So how many days the employee was at work and how many hours they worked, etc. This comes from the company that needs the payroll service. And the payroll service provider, which is the vendor, prepares exactly what the payroll department for the company is supposed to prepare. Prepare the paychecks, which is the actual payments to the employees, earning statements, any reports that the payroll department prepares, and then payroll register. Payroll register is a list of all the employees that are getting paid in the pay period, and the pay period is usually for a month. It could be for a week or 2 weeks as well, depending on the company needs. And the payroll service provider also provides tax reports that the company needs to file with the government. So the payroll service provider does everything the payroll department would do, and in exchange they get a fee. So what is the benefit of having the payroll service provider? For smaller companies, the biggest benefit is it's cheaper. If you hire an accountant to do the payroll and give them a monthly salary of $10,000 or 10,000 riyals, let's say, it's very expensive. You could pay the payroll service provider 2,000 riyals and they would provide you the service. In addition, you would not have to buy the computer and the software and the office furniture for the accountant and so forth. So it is cheaper all the way. The disadvantage is because the payroll service provider is outside the company itself, they don't know what is going on in the company, so they only rely on the data that is provided to them. As a result, they could make more errors than someone doing it in-house. In addition, the confidential information of the employees, such as bank account number, the ID number, the address, this is provided to the payroll service provider. So this information again is shared with an outsider. This is risky. They could lose it, or someone who's not supposed to look at this information might look at it. So there is this disadvantage of compromising the confidential information. However, if you have a good trustworthy service provider. Like we were, the firm that I used to work for, we used to perform the payroll for hundreds of small companies, and we did not make usually errors, uh, uh, big errors anyway. Small errors could be made by your internal payroll department as well. And also, if the company is um of good professionals, they know how to keep the confidential information confidential. So it's a good option for smaller companies to subscribe to a payroll service provider. It is cheaper and it is more efficient. And this disadvantages are not uh, that prominent. These are there. The possibility of these disadvantages are there, but they're not common. They don't happen to most companies. These problems do not occur to most companies. Now, the next set of slides, we're going to talk about the threats and controls in the human resources and payroll department, like we do in every other uh, chapter. It's a question. There is a difference between a paycheck and payroll register. A paycheck is the individual payment, individual check made to the employees. That's a paycheck. Payroll register is a list of all the employees who got paid and the amount they got paid and the date they got paid. So payroll register is a list, and paycheck is an individual check that is paid to each individual employee. Is that clear? Natif, is that clear? Okay. Do they form a payroll register to create a paycheck? No, the paychecks are registered in the payroll register. So all the paychecks that are paid, that are they're registered in the payroll register, right? Okay. Now, the first threat is unqualified or dishonest employees. The company could hire people who are not qualified to do the job, or people who may be qualified but they're dishonest. If this happens, if they hire unqualified people that don't know how to do the job, the production costs could go up. They could be high production expenses. They hire dishonest employees, there could be theft. And if they're dishonest or not dishonest, unqualified employees, they may do things that are not right. They may do things that are wrong, prohibited by the government, and it could cost them penalties. It could cost them litigation. Litigation is court cases, or loss of reputation with the customer. So they may provide the customer with lack of proper service, which would cause loss of reputation. How to remedy this? How to counter this? First, check the qualifications of the employees. So if the employee applies, you can check, verify their degree with the university they graduated from. You could ask for reference letters from professors that they studied under. So you could check qualifications. You could also ask their previous employer about their employment history if they had a previous employer listed in their CV. You could also do background checks to see whether they had any past police cases. If they come from a different country, you can check with the police of that country. The Qatar University does that when hiring from outside, to see if the employee had any criminal records before. So this checking of background helps in identifying dishonesty, a history of any dishonesty, or if the employee was not qualified, as qualified as they have uh, demonstrated in their CV. So this would counter. And again, some people look very good on paper, and your references come as good, and once they start working, you find that they're not suitable for the job. So this can still happen, but you can minimize that by talking to people or checking with people who know them, right? And every year I write many recommendation letters for students who have studied in my classes, and I know them and so forth. And if I um, do not know a student very well, or if it is too far away, I usually do not provide detail, because if I don't remember details, I don't provide details. And this is a trust, this is an amana, the recommendation letter. What happened once, a student who got a C in my class asked me for a recommendation letter, and I advised the student to go to a professor where they had received an A, right? But the student insisted, so I had to write what I know about the student, because this is a trust. I cannot write something about a student that is not true. Also about the conduct and the attendance of the students, the timely arrival. The employers are very interested in the attendance history and the uh, timeliness of the student in both coming to class and in doing the work on time, etc. So all of these things are very important. Sometimes they're more important to the employer than even grades, because they will teach you the work. If your habits are not good, if you're not punctual, you are not regular at work, then that becomes a problem for them. So keep this in mind uh, as you are going through the university experience, because this is going to come back to you if you're lacking in these areas. The next threat is violation of laws. If the employees don't know the regulations, that labor laws that the country or the government imposes. For example, in Qatar, there is a law that during the summer months, employees are not supposed to work outside during the middle of the day. It's too hot. And if they're found outside, the company would be fined. The company might face penalties or litigation, court cases because of that. So the remedy to that is maintain documentation, meaning make sure that the company policies are clear and they are made known to all the employees that you're not supposed to do this, and this is, the government does not allow this, and the government requires you to wear a helmet here, etc., etc. All of these things should be documented and made sure that the company has a strict policy in following the regulations. And the human resources managers should be trained on all the regulations, so they know what to do and what not to do, because this could not only um, cause penalties, but it could get injured. People could die. For example, if you're not following the safety regulations imposed by the government in construction work and so forth, it could be dangerous for people. So this is very important that you know and you train and you follow the regulations. The next threat is unauthorized changes to the master file. Now, the master file, you should all know by now, this is a file that is more permanent in nature, which has information on the employees' um, personal details, name, date of birth, permanent address, etc., as well as some information that changes from time to time, but not regularly, like the salary or the position and so forth. And if these are changed without authorization, this could increase costs and it could impair decision making. If the salary is increased without authorization, this would obviously increase the cost, and the payment made and the decisions made with those payments and so would be incorrect. So they would impair, meaning harm the decision making, because the numbers are inaccurate. They have been changed from what they should be. The remedy for this, number one, is separating the duties between human resources and payroll. So there are two parts to any payroll preparation. The first part is updating the master file if there is any change. So if the employee's position changed, if the employee was promoted, or if the employee's salary increased, right? this should be changed by the Human Resource Department, which is a separate department than payroll. Once that is done, the second task is to calculate the payment for that pay period and paying the employee. That should be done by the payroll department. So updating of master file and then payment. This should be separated. Anytime you separate duties, it causes two things. Number one, it makes it more difficult to do fraud because more than one party is involved, more than one individual, more than one is involved. Second thing it does, it increases accuracy and reduces errors because if one of them made a mistake, there is a possibility that the other one would catch it, right? So separating the duty not only prevents fraud, but it improves uh, accuracy. And this will come back to you if you're going to take auditing 2, inshallah, next semester. This will come back again and again, the segregation of duty. Okay? The segregation of duty is going to come back. The second is doing independent review of updates. And again, if someone is doing the update, the supervisor should do the review. Again, you see two set of eyes looking at it. It increases accuracy, reduces the possibility of fraud. And the third is restricting the access. So only those people who are authorized to make changes should have access to the master file. Either it's physical in a cabinet with lock and key, or it's protected with password, username. So these are some ways of preventing unauthorized changes to the master file. The next threat is inaccurate processing of payroll. Now, if the payroll is calculated incorrectly, it damages employee morale, number one. So if the employee overtime and they're expecting a higher pay this period and it's inaccurately calculated, then it would harm the employee morale because their payment would be delayed. And if it is something that relates to government regulation, for example, the government says that you have to pay more when the employee works overtime, 1.5 times when the employee works overtime, or you have to pay a certain amount of tax. Those are inaccurately calculated, and this would cause penalties. The way to remedy this are two methods listed here, and I'm going to explain this to you a little bit because without knowing the full detail, you'll not understand 100%. Both of these are mathematical techniques to catch the error. The first one is using batch totals to verify all transactions processed. Payroll is usually processed in batches. The entire company gets paid at the same time, and there are batch totals for different departments, different group of employees, different categories of employees, and so forth. And those totals should be double checked and recalculated to ensure that it's accurate. So it's a mathematical process to ensure accuracy. The second method is cross-footing of payroll register. Now, cross-footing of payroll register. Payroll register usually has columns and rows. In every row, there is an employee's name and the details of the calculation. And in every column, there is one particular item. For example, in one first column, it could be the total amount. In the second column, it could be tax. In the third column, it could be overtime. In the fourth column, it could be vacation pay, things like that. So there is a method of cross-footing of payroll register where you check the sums of the rows and you check the sums of the columns to ensure that the calculation is accurate. And again, we are not doing the detailed calculation, so this is somewhat going to be superficial to you, not entirely clear. But these two are mathematical ways. One is to do batch totals, checking the batch totals. The other one is cross-footing of payroll register, both mathematical techniques to check the accuracy of the payroll that was calculated. Okay? All right. The next threat is inaccurate time data, which is paying employees for time that they did not work, services that they did not perform. And it could be that somebody could forget to punch out when they're leaving, forget to put their finger on the machine, or inaccurately enter the number of hours they have worked, etc. So there are some uh, simple techniques which could minimize, and again, being careful in doing the data processing and entering the system, the item in the system, is always helpful. There are some safety nets. For example, the first one is, instead of manual entry, you could use badge readers or bar scanners or online terminals for data entry. So you could have somebody punching the finger and so forth when they come in, and punching the finger when they leave. This would enter the exact accurate time. But even then, it is possible that the employee leaves and forgets to punch out. So what happens then? How can you catch? Well, you could do something called edit checks, which is going to check the limit of validity. So let's say in a 24-hour period, the employee is supposed to work 8 hours. But let's say the employee clocked in and they forgot to clock out. The system is going to show that the employee worked 24 hours in a 25-hour period. And the system will flag that this is a number that is above the limit of 8 hours. Is this accurate? And it is possible, for example, doctors, nurses, and so forth, sometimes they have to work in emergency cases 24 hours. If this is actually what happened, then the manager could override it. But if it didn't happen, then they could fix it. The system is going to flag it. The system is going to question the number which is outside the limit. The third is segregation of duties. There's a question that says, payment for services not received, isn't that inaccurate processing? It could be in the inaccurate processing category as well, but here we're talking about the timekeeping error, a particular type of error where the employee has entered time that they did not work, right? So that's inaccurate time processing. This inaccurate processing could happen in the inaccurate calculation as well, right? If somebody worked 8 hours, you could inaccurately calculate that for 10 hours as well. But the error would not be in capturing the time. This is talking about the error happening when the time entered is inaccurate. The following calculation is no problem. They're paid for 15 hours because the system shows 15 hours. But the problem is the 15 hours the system shows is inaccurate. You follow? Got it? Okay. Now, the segregation of duties is again here, as you see, master file update and payroll processing. The segregation of duties always help in catching errors because more than one person is looking at, or more than one department is looking at the same data. And if someone misses it, someone else is likely to catch it, right? The fourth point is along the same lines, supervisor review and approval. If the accountant made a mistake, his supervisor or her supervisor could catch it, right? If there is an error in there. So these are simple methods of catching the error in this category. The next one is theft or fraudulent distribution of paychecks. Now we're talking about physical checks. Checks that are written and paid to physically employees that are working, or it could also be electronic payments made to fictitious ghost or terminated employee. Fictitious or ghost employees mean there is no actual employee. Somebody just created an account for an employee, and the bank account for that employee is connected to their own account. So the employee actually does not work for the company. It's just a fake employee, ghost employee, or fictitious employee. And every payroll period, their payment is processed and it goes to a bank account, which is the bank account of the person who's doing the fraud. This can happen. Or the payment by mistake could continue for an employee who no longer works for the company. So it could continue if the master file and the payroll is not updated that this employee was terminated or they have retired or they have left the company. So this could happen. Now, there are a number of remedies listed here that could reduce the possibility of these happening. The first one is restriction of access to blank payroll checks, check signing machine, and EFT, electronic fund transfer. So only allowing those people who are responsible for distributing the checks and calculating the checks to have access to the blank payroll checks. The check signing machine, there is a check signing machine which has the company's stamp and so forth, used in big companies. And then the electronic fund transfer authorization. Only the employees who are responsible for this should have access to these items. Number two, direct deposit and sequential pre-numbering of checks and reconciliation. Now, not having checks, just making direct deposits eliminates the possibility of blank payroll checks. So you will not have to deal with blank payroll checks. So that's taken off of the list. If you do have blank payroll checks, then sequential pre-numbering of checks and reconciliation would minimize this type of fraud. What does this mean? Usually, the payroll checks have a different sequence of numbers than the checks that are written for other purposes. So the checks that you write to your suppliers and other people have a different sequence. Let's say they are 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, like that. The payroll checks have a different sequence, so that they could be 10,001, 10,002, 10,003. And when I used to work for the CPA firm, most small business companies had two different sequences for the payroll checks. And you could see the payroll check and you would know that this number is a payroll check number. And if you remember from your financial accounting and intermediate accounting class, when you do the bank reconciliation, there are checks that are outstanding at the end of the month that do not clear the bank in that month. Well, if you have a payroll check, employees are working to get their payment, and the payroll check very quickly. They should be outstanding for many days. If you have paychecks that are outstanding in the bank reconciliation for a period of time, that is a flag that should raise your eyebrows. You should question, why is this employee not taking this check? Why is it not clearing the bank, right? So this is again a question mark which requires further investigation to see whether there is a problem of theft or fraud. Okay. The third point is signature of checks only with proper supporting documentation. When the paychecks are signed, they should have proper documentation that shows that the employee worked this many days, this many hours, they worked overtime, they had vacation. All of these things should be provided in a supporting document that proves the work performed by the employee. And the check should be signed after looking at those supporting documents. So this would ensure that this is a true employee and not somebody who's fake. Number four, independent reconciliation of the payroll bank account. Usually big companies have a separate bank account which handles the payroll checks. So all the payments to the employees are made using a separate bank account, and the suppliers and other expenses are from a different bank account. So this makes it easy to catch any problems with the payroll checks if they're separately accounted for with a separate bank account. Number five, segregation of duties between recording and distribution of checks. So there is a set of accountants who are going to record the payroll, record the journal entries, record the amounts, etc., calculate. And then there's a different group of people who would distribute the funds or the checks. Again, segregation or separation of duties always increases the possibility of catching the error and reduces the possibility of fraud. And this one, which is number six, unclaimed checks returned and investigated. So if the employee's check comes, an employee's check comes to the branch and the employee does not pick up the check for a number of days, and it is returned to the payroll department for investigation, because why is the employee not taking the payment? Why is the employee not taking the check? Or if the check bounces back from the bank, if the bank account was closed and so forth, this should be investigated to see why is this? Is there a problem? Does the employee still work here, etc.? So these are some ways that you could catch and minimize these type of errors. Okay, you can ask me questions like you're asking anytime. I'm going to continue, inshallah. The next problem is loss, alteration, or unauthorized disclosure of data. If you lose the data, it could delay or it could cause inaccurate processing of the payment and records. If you disclose the data that you're not supposed to disclose, unauthorized disclosure of confidential information, this violates the law and it harms employee morale. So just imagine if the employee's bank account information was stolen by some outsider. The employee would be dissatisfied, would be irritated. So this is not something that the employee expects. The employee gives the information and trusts that we will keep it safe and confidential. So if this happens, this harms the employee morale. How could this be minimized? Number one, backing up of data and labeling of data. So if the data is lost or misplaced, you have a backup. And the data is labeled as well with what is inside the disk or inside the cabinet and so forth. And it should be marked confidential as well, so that anybody who's going to open it would know that this is information that they are not supposed to look at, and only the authorized people should look at this. Access control and incompatible responsibilities. Access control is either physical access. You could have it in a physical filing cabinet with lock and key, and only the people who have the responsibility of making updates to those files should have access to those keys, or password protection, and only the password should be known by those people who are supposed to make changes. Incompatible responsibility means segregation of duties. So the people who are doing the update should not process the data, or the people who are responsible for the confidential information should not process the payroll. The encryption of data, if the file is electronic and it's opened, the data should be encrypted. So it should not be plain English or Arabic or plain numbers. It should be code, should be encrypted. So even if somebody opens the file, they will not be able to read or understand what is written. It is encrypted, and it has to be decrypted by the people who actually will use it, right? And the last one is data transmission control. So when the data is transmitted, when the data is sent from one location to another, there should be extra security if there is confidential information. For example, when my bank sends me the bank statement, it has a password, and the password is not accompanying the bank statement. I know the password, and I can only open it with the password. And if I try the password too many times and it doesn't open, the file will be locked. So these are transmission controls. There are extra layers of security to maintain the confidentiality of the data. All right. And the last threat is poor performance by the human resources and payroll department. And this could damage employee relations, which could reduce profitability. So if you inaccurately calculate the payroll, or if you do not give the employee the proper bonuses, etc., proper calculation is not done, the employee morale is damaged. And as we discussed in our last class, employee morale harms customer relations, which harms profitability. How to remedy this? There is only one big remedy listed here, and it involves a lot of work, which is the formal evaluation and performance review process of the people who work in the human resources and payroll department. And usually big companies have surveys that ask employees about the performance of departments, and human resources and payroll is one of the big departments that every employee receives service from. So looking at how the service is and whether the employees are satisfied or not, and if there needs to be changes to the service, this should be taken into consideration, and the changes should be made. Okay, so that brings us to the end of chapter 15, which is our last chapter. And the final exam includes chapters 12, 13, 14, and 15. The revenue cycle, the expenditure cycle, the production cycle, and the human resources and payroll cycle. And in the next two classes, on Tuesday as well as Sunday, we're going to go through a few cases where I'm going to present to you situations and I'm going to ask you questions to brainstorm and answer. Two things will come out of those. One is you're going to be more prepared for the final exam. It will help you in your preparation for the final exam. And number two, it might give you ideas to enhance your project as well. So we're going to do this starting from Tuesday, and then we'll do it also on Sunday. Next Tuesday, not day after tomorrow, next Tuesday I'm going to do review for the final exam, and also the quiz, the last quiz on chapters 14 and 15 is going to be on November 17th, which is next Tuesday. Those case studies and your participation in the case studies are not great. They're going to be helpful in your preparation towards the final exam, as well as they might give you ideas to enhance your project. Okay? Do you have any questions for me about chapter 15 or what we discussed today or your project? I have received some questions to different students regarding the project, and I tried to answer them quickly. So if you have any questions, you can ask me now, or you can send me emails like you have done in the past, and take the project with enthusiasm and try to enjoy the process and learn in the process, inshallah. Is there any question for me right now that I can answer? Anything you need from me? This is a very critical time, the next 2-3 weeks, for you to utilize the time and not waste any time, because you will be in a crunch. In a couple of weeks, you'll have multiple exams coming to you at the same time. So you should use this time. And I have finished. There will be no new material that is included in the final exam after today. So you have plenty of time, right? You have 2 weeks. The exam is on the 25th. More than 2 weeks to study, inshallah. Okay? All right. If there are no questions, we're going to end, inshallah. And I will see you on Tuesday. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.